Welcome to Thueringer for Farming Simulator 15. We now continue in our reading of The Octopus, A Story of California by Frank Norris, Chapter 2. She was on the ranch more for the sake of being with her parents than from any necessity of employment. Vaguely, he seemed to understand that in the great new land of the West, in the open air, healthy life of the ranches, where the conditions of earning a livelihood were of the easiest, refinement among the younger women was easily to be found. Not the refinement of education or culture, but the natural, intuitive refinement of the woman. Not as yet defiled and crushed out by the sordid, strenuous life struggles of overpopulated districts. It was the original, intended, and natural delicacy of an elemental existence, close to nature, close to life, close to the great kindly earth. As Hilma laid the table spread, her arms open to their widest reach, the white cloth setting a little glisten of reflected light underneath the chin, Annixter stirred in his place uneasily. "Oh, it's you, isn't it, Miss Hilma?" he remarked, for the sake of saying something. Good morning. How do you do?" "Good morning, sir," she answered, looking up, resting for a moment on her outspread palms. "I hope you are better." Her voice was low in pitch and of a velvety huskiness, seeming to come more from her chest than from her throat. "Well, I'm some better," growled Annixter. Then suddenly he demanded, "Where's that dog?" A decrepit Irish setter sometimes made his appearance in and about the ranch house, sleeping under the bed and eating when anyone about the place thought to give him a plate of bread. Annixter had no particular interest in the dog. For weeks at a time he ignored its existence. It was not his dog. But today it seemed as if he could not let the subject rest. For no reason that he could explain even to himself, he recurred to it continually. He questioned Hilma minutely all about the dog. Who owned him? How old did she think he was? Did she imagine the dog was sick? Where had he got to? Maybe he had crawled off to die somewhere. He recurred to the subject all through the meal. Apparently, he could talk of nothing else. And as she finally went away after clearing off the table, he went onto the porch and called after her. "Say, Miss Hilma." "Yes, sir." "If that dog turns up again, you let me know." "Very well, sir." Annixter returned to the dining room and sat down in the chair he had just vacated. "To hell with the dog," he muttered, enraged. He could not tell why. When at length he allowed his attention to wander from Hilma Tree, he found that he had been staring fixedly at a thermometer upon the wall opposite, and this made him think that it had long been his intention to buy a fine barometer, an instrument that could be accurately depended on. But the barometer suggested the present condition of the weather and the likelihood of rain. In such case, much was to be done in the way of getting the seed ready and overhauling his plows and drills. He had not been away from the house in 2 days. It was time to be up and doing. He determined to put in the afternoon taking a look around and have a late supper. He would not go to Los Muertos. He would ignore Magnus de Eric's invitation. Possibly, though, it might be well to run over and see what was up. "If I do," he said to himself, "I'll ride the buckskin." The buckskin was a half-broken bronco that fought like a fiend under the saddle until the quirt and spur brought her to her senses. But Annixter remembered that the Trees' cottage next to the dairy house looked out upon the stables, and perhaps Hilma would see him while he was mounting the horse and be impressed with his courage. "Huh!" grunted Annixter under his breath. "I should like to see that fool Delaney try to bust that bronc." That's what I'd like to see. However, as Annixter stepped from the porch of the ranch house, he was surprised to notice a gray haze over all the sky. The sunlight was gone. There was a sense of coolness in the air. The weather vane on the barn, a fine golden trotting horse with flamboyant mane and tail, was veering in a southwest wind. Evidently, the expected rain was close at hand. Annixter crossed over to the stables, reflecting that he could ride the buckskin to the Trees' cottage and tell Hilma that he would not be home to supper. The conference at Los Muertos would be an admirable excuse for this, and upon the spot he resolved to go over to the Derrick ranch house after all. As he passed the Trees' cottage, he observed with satisfaction that Hilma was going to and fro in the front room. If he busted the buckskin in the yard before the stable, she could not help but see. Annixter found the stableman in the back of the barn, greasing the axles of the buggy, and ordered him to put the saddle on the buckskin. "Why, I don't think she's here, sir," answered the stableman, glancing into the stalls. "No, I remember now. Delaney took her out just after dinner. His other horse went lame, and he wanted to go down by the long trestle to mend the fence. He started out, but had to come back." "Oh, Delaney got her, did he?" "Yes, sir. He had a circus with her, but he busted her right enough. When it comes to horse, Delaney can wipe the eye of any cowpuncher in the county, I guess." "He can't he?" observed Annixter. Then, after a silence, "Well, all right, Billy, put my saddle on whatever you've got here. I'm going over to Los Muertos this afternoon." "You'll want to look out for the rain, Mr. Annixter," remarked Billy. "Guess we'll have rain before night." "I'll take a rubber coat," answered Annixter. "Bring the horse up to the ranch house when you're ready." Annixter returned to the house to look for his rubber coat in deep disgust, not permitting himself to glance toward the dairy house and the Trees' cottage. But as he reached the porch, he heard the telephone ringing his call. It was Presley, who rang up from Los Muertos. He had heard from Heron that Annixter was, perhaps, coming over that evening. If he came, would he mind bringing over his, Presley's, bicycle? He had left it at the Queen Sabe Ranch the day before, and had forgotten to come back that way for it. "Well," objected Annixter, a surly note in his voice, "I was going to ride over." "Oh, never mind then," returned Presley easily. "I was to blame for forgetting it. Don't bother about it. I'll come over some of these days and get it myself." Annixter hung up the transmitter with a vehement wrench and stamped out of the room, banging the door. He found his rubber coat hanging in the hallway and swung into it with a fierce movement of the shoulders that all but started the seams. Everything seemed to conspire to thwart him. It was just like that absent-minded crazy poet Presley to forget his wheel. Well, he could come after it himself. He, Annixter, would ride some horse anyhow. When he came out upon the porch, he saw the wheel leaning against the fence where Presley had left it. If it stayed there much longer, the rain would catch it. Annixter ripped out an oath. At every moment his ill humor was increasing. Yet, for all that, he went back to the stable, pushing the bicycle before him, and countermanded his order, directing the stableman to get the buggy ready. He himself carefully stowed Presley's bicycle under the seat, covering it with a couple of empty sacks and a tarpaulin carriage cover. While he was doing this, the stableman uttered an exclamation and paused in the act of backing the horse into the shafts, holding up a hand, listening. From the hollow roof of the barn and from the thick velvet-like padding of dust over the ground outside, and from among the leaves of the few nearby trees and plants, there came a vast, monotonous murmur that seemed to issue from all quarters of the horizon at once, a prolonged and subdued rustling sound, steady, even persistent. "There's your rein," announced the stableman. "The first of the season." "And I got to be out in it," fumed Annixter. "And I suppose those swine will quit working on the big barn now." When the buggy was finally ready, he put on his rubber coat, climbed in, and without waiting for the stableman to raise the top, drove out into the rain, a new-lit cigar in his teeth. As he passed the dairy house, he saw Hilma standing in the doorway, holding out her hand to the rain, her face turned upward toward the gray sky, amused and interested at this first shower of the wet season. She was so absorbed that she did not see Annixter, and his clumsy nod in her direction passed unnoticed. "She did it on purpose," Annixter told himself, chewing fiercely on his cigar. "Cuts me now, hey? Well, this does settle it. She leaves this ranch before I'm a day older." He decided that he would put off his tour of inspection till the next day. Traveling in the buggy as he did, he must keep to the road which led to Derek's, in very roundabout fashion by way of Guadalajara. The rain would reduce the thick dust of the road to 2 feet of viscid mud. It would take him quite 3 hours to reach the ranch house on Los Muertos. He thought of Delaney and the buckskin and ground his teeth. And all this trouble, if you please, because of a fool female girl. A fine way for him to waste his time. Well, now he was done with it. His decision was taken now. She should pack. Steadily the rain increased. There was no wind. The thick veil of wet descended straight from sky to earth, blurring distant outlines, spreading a vast sheen of gray over all the landscape. Its volume became greater. The prolonged murmuring note took on a deeper tone. At the gate to the road which led across Dyke's hop fields toward Guadalajara, Annixter was obliged to descend and raise the top of the buggy. In doing so, he caught the flesh of his hand in the joint of the iron elbow that supported the top and pinched it cruelly. It was a last misery, the culmination of a long train of wretchedness. On the instant, he hated Helmetry so fiercely that his sharply set teeth all but bit his cigar in two. While he was grabbing and wrenching at the buggy top, the water from his hat brim dripping down upon his nose, the horse, restive under the drench of the rain, moved uneasily. "Yaw, you!" he shouted, inarticulate with exasperation. You girl! Wait till I get a hold of you! Whoa, you!" But there was an interruption. Delaney, riding the buckskin, came around a bend in the road at a slow trot, and Annixter, getting into the buggy again, found himself face to face with him. "Why, hello, Mr. Annixter," said he, pulling up. "Kind of, sort of wet, isn't it?" Annixter, his face suddenly scarlet, sat back in his place, abruptly exclaiming, Oh, there you are you?" "I've been down there," explained Delaney with a motion of his head toward the railroad, "to mend that break in the fence by the long trestle, and I thought while I was about it, I'd follow down along the fence toward Guadalajara to see if there were any more breaks, but I guess it's all right." "Oh, you guess it's all right, do you?" observed Annixter through his teeth. Yes," returned the other, bewildered at the truculent ring in Annixter's voice. "I mended that break by the long trestle just now, and—" "Well, why didn't you mend it a week ago?" shouted Annixter wrathfully. "I've been looking for you all the morning, I have, and who told you could take that buckskin? And the sheep were all over in the right-of-way last night because of that break. And here that filthy Pip S. Behrman comes down here this morning and wants to make trouble for me." Suddenly he cried out, "What do I feed you for? What do I keep you around here for? Think it's just to fatten up your carcass, hey?" Mr. Annixter," began Delaney. "And don't talk to me," vociferated the other, exciting himself with his own noise. "Don't you say a word to me even to apologize. If I've spoken to you once about that break, I've spoken 50 times. Why, sir, declared Delaney, beginning to get indignant. The sheep did it themselves last night. I told you not to talk to me, clamored Annixter. But say, look here, get off the ranch. You get off the ranch. And taking that buckskin against my express orders. I won't have your kind about the place. Not much. I'm easygoing enough, Lord knows. But I don't propose to be imposed on all the time. Pack off, you understand, and do it lively. Go to the foreman and tell him I told you to pay you off and then clear out. And you hear me, he concluded, with a menacing outthrust of his lower jaw. You hear me. If I catch you hanging around the ranch house after this, or if I so much as see you on Quien Sabe, I'll show you the way off it, my friend, at the toe of my boot. Now then, get out of the way and let me pass. Angry beyond the power of retort, Delaney drove the spurs into the buckskin and passed the buggy in a single bound. Annixter gathered up the reins and drove on, muttering to himself and occasionally looking back to observe the buckskin flying toward the ranch house in a spattering shower of mud, Delaney urging her on, his head bent down against the falling rain. Huh, grunted Annixter with grim satisfaction, a certain sense of good humor at length returning to him. That just about takes the saleratus out of your dough, my friend. A little farther on, Annixter got out of the buggy a second time to open another gate that led him out upon the upper road, not far distant from Guadalajara. It was a road that connected the town with Bonneville and parallel with the railroad tracks. On the other side of the track, he could see the infinite extension of the brown, bare land of Los Muertos, turning now to a soft, moist welter of fertility under the insistent caressing of the rain. The hard, sun-baked clods were decomposing, the crevices between drinking the wet with an eager, sucking noise. But the prospect was dreary. The distant horizons were blotted under drifting mists of rain. The eternal monotony of the earth lay open to the somber low sky without a single adornment, without a single variation from its melancholy flatness. Near at hand, the wires between the telegraph poles vibrated with a faint humming under the multitudinous fingering of the myriad of falling drops, striking among them and dripping off steadily from one to another. The poles themselves were dark and swollen and glistening with wet, while the little cones of glass on the transverse bars reflected the dull gray light of the end of the afternoon. As Annixter was about to drive on, a freight train passed, coming from Guadalajara, going northward toward Bonneville, Fresno, and San Francisco. It was a long train, moving slowly and methodically, with a measured coughing of its locomotive and a rhythmic cadence of its trucks over the interstices of the rails. On 2 or 3 of the flat cars near its end, Annixter plainly saw Magnus de Eric's plows, their bright coating of red and green paint setting a single brilliant note in all this array of gray and brown. Annixter halted, watching the train file past, carrying Derek's plows away from his ranch at this very time of the first rain when they would be most needed. He watched it, silent, thoughtful, and without articulate comment. Even after it passed, he sat in his place a long time, watching it lose itself slowly in the distance, its prolonged rumble diminishing to a faint murmur. Soon he heard the engine sounding its whistle for the long trestle. But the moving train no longer carried with it that impression of terror and destruction that had so thrilled Presley's imagination the night before. It passed slowly on its way with a mournful roll of wheels, like the passing of a cortege, like a file of artillery caissons charioting dead bodies. The engine's smoke enveloping it in a mournful veil, leaving a sense of melancholy in its wake, moving past there lugubrious, lamentable, infinitely sad under the gray sky and under the gray mist of rain which continued to fall with a subdued, rustling sound, steady, persistent, a vast, monotonous murmur that seemed to come from all quarters of the horizon at once. Chapter 3. When Annixter arrived at the Los Muertos ranch house that same evening, he found a little group already assembled in the dining room. Magnus Derrick, wearing the frock coat of broadcloth that he had put on for the occasion, stood with his back to the fireplace. Heron sat close at hand, one leg thrown over the arm of his chair. Presley lounged on the sofa in corduroys and high-laced boots, smoking cigarettes. Broderson leaned on his folded arms at one corner of the dining table, and Genslinger, editor and proprietor of the principal newspaper of the county, the Bonneville Mercury, stood with his hat and driving gloves under his arm opposite Derrick, a half-empty glass of whiskey and water in his hand. As Annixter entered, he heard Genslinger observe, "I'll have a leader in the Mercury tomorrow that will interest you people. There's some talk of your ranch lands being graded in value this winter. I suppose you will all buy?" In an instant, the editor's words had riveted upon him the attention of every man in the room. Annixter broke the moment's silence that followed with the remark, "Well, it's about time they graded those lands of theirs." The question in issue in Genslinger's remark was of the most vital interest to the ranchers around Bonneville and Guadalajara. Neither Magnus Derrick, Broderson, Annixter, nor Osterman actually owned all the ranches which they worked. As yet, the vast majority of these wheat lands were the property of the P&SW. The explanation of this condition of affairs went back to the early history of the Pacific and Southwestern, when, as a bonus for the construction of the road, the national government had granted to the company the odd-numbered sections of land on either side of the proposed line of route, for a distance of 20 miles. Indisputably, these sections belonged to the P&SW. The even-numbered sections, being government property, could be and had been taken up by the ranchers. But the railroad sections, or as they were called, the alternate sections, would have to be purchased direct from the railroad itself. But this had not prevented the farmers from coming in upon that part of the San Joaquin. Long before this, the railroad had thrown open these lands and, by means of circulars, distributed broadcasts throughout the state, and expressly invited settlement thereon. At that time, patents had not been issued to the railroad for their odd-numbered sections, but as soon as a land was patented, the railroad would grade it in value and offer it for sale, the first occupants having the first chance at purchase. The price of these lands was to be fixed by the price the government put upon its own adjoining lands, about $2.50 per acre. With cultivation and improvement, the ranches must inevitably appreciate in value. There was every chance to make fortunes. When the railroad lands about Bonneville had been thrown open, there had been almost a rush in the matter of settlement, and Broderson, Annixter, Derrick, and Osterman, being foremost with their claims, had secured the pick of the county. But the land once settled upon, the P&SW seemed to be in no hurry as to fixing exactly the value of its sections included in the various ranches and offering them for sale. The matter dragged along from year to year, was forgotten for months together, being only brought to mind on such occasions as this, when the rumor spread that the general office was about to take definite action in the affair. "As soon as a railroad wants to talk business with me," observed Annixter, "about selling me their interest in Quinsabe, I'm ready. The land is more than quadrupled in value. I'll bet I could sell it tomorrow for $15 an acre. And if I buy of the railroad for $2.50 an acre, there's boodle in the game." "For $2.50, exclaimed Genslinger. You don't suppose a railroad will let their land go for any such figure as that, do you? Wherever did you get that idea? From the circulars and pamphlets, answered Heron, that the railroad issue to us when they open these lands. They are pledged to that. Even the P&SW couldn't break such a pledge as that. You are new in the country, Mr. Genslinger. You don't remember the conditions upon which we took up this land. And our improvements, exclaimed Annixter. Why, Magnus and I have put about $5,000 between us into that irrigating ditch already. I guess we're not improving the land just to make it valuable for the railroad people. No matter how much we improve the land or how much it increases in value, they have got to stick by their agreement on the basis of $2.50 per acre. Here's one case where the P&SW don't get everything in sight. Genslinger frowned, perplexed. I am new in the country, as Heron says, he answered, but it seems to me that there's no fairness in that proposition. The presence of the railroad has helped increase the value of your ranches quite as much as your improvements. Why should you get all the benefit of the rise in value, and the railroad get nothing? The fair way would be to share it between you. I don't care anything about that, declared Annixter. They agreed to charge but $2.50, and they've got to stick to it. Well, murmured Genslinger, from what I know of the affair, I don't believe the P&SW intends to sell for the $2.50 an acre at all. The managers of the road want the best price they can get for everything in these hard times. Times aren't ever hard for the railroad, hazards old Broderson. Broderson was the oldest man in the room. He was about 65 years of age, venerable, with a white beard. His figure bent earthwards with hard work. He was a narrow-minded man, painfully conscientious in his statements, lest he should be unjust to somebody. A slow thinker, unable to let a subject drop when once he had started upon it. He had no sooner uttered his remark about hard times than he was moved to qualify it. Hard times, he repeated, a troubled, perplexed note in his voice. Well, yes, I suppose the road does have hard times, maybe. Everybody does, of course. I didn't mean that exactly. I believe in being just and fair to everybody. I mean that we've got to use their lines and pay their charges good years and bad years. The P&SW being the only road in the state. That is, well, when I say the only road, no, I won't say the only road. Of course there are other roads. There's the DP&M and the San Francisco and North Pacific that runs up to Ukiah. I got a brother-in-law in Ukiah. There's not much of wheat country around Ukiah, though. They do grow some wheat there, come to think. But I guess it's too far north. Well, of course there isn't much. Perhaps 60,000 acres in the whole country, if you include barley and oats. I don't know. Maybe it's nearer 40,000. I don't remember very well. That's a good many years ago. But Annixter, at the end of all patience, turned to Genslinger, cutting short the old man. Oh, rot! Of course the railroad will sell at $2.50, he cries. We got the contracts. Look to them then, Mr. Annixter, retorted Genslinger significantly. Look to them. Be sure you are protected. Soon after this, Genslinger took himself away, and Derek's Chinaman came in to set the table. What do you suppose he meant? Asked Broderson when Genslinger was gone. About this land business? Said Annixter. Oh, I don't know. Some tomfool idea. Haven't we got their terms printed in black and white in their circulars? There's their pledge. Oh, as to pledges, murmured Broderson, the railroad is not always too much hindered by those. Where's Osterman? Demanded Annixter, abruptly changing the subject, as if it were not worth discussion. Isn't that goat Osterman coming down here tonight? You telephoned him, didn't you, presently? Inquired Agnes. Presently had taken Princess Nathalie upon his knee, stroking her long, sleek hair, and the cat, stupefied with beatitude, had closed her eyes to two fine lines, clawing softly at the corduroy of Presley's trousers with alternate paws. "Yes, sir," returned Presley. "He said he would be here." And as he spoke, young Osterman arrived. He was a young fellow, but singularly inclined to baldness. His ears, very red and large, stuck out at right angles from either side of his head, and his mouth, too, was large, a great horizontal slit beneath his nose. His cheeks were of a brownish red, the cheekbones a little salient. His face was that of a comic actor, a singer of songs, a man never at a loss for an answer, continually striving to make a laugh. But he took no great interest in ranching, and left the management of his land to his superintendents and foremen, he himself living in Bonneville. He was a poser, a wearer of clothes, forever acting a part, striving to create an impression, to draw attention to himself. He was not without a certain energy, but he devoted it to small ends, to perfecting himself in little accomplishments, continually running after some new thing, incapable of persisting long in any one course. At one moment his mania would be fencing, the next sleight of hand tricks, the next archery,